The most expensive album ever sold wasn't auctioned by a collector or someone's estate. It was sold by the US government to a cryptocurrency collective/art group for $4 million. It lives inside this box. I can't show you the actual disc. Legally, I'm not allowed to. The sale came with strict conditions spelled out in this leather-bound contract. Only the owner and whoever they invite to private listening parties is allowed to hear it. For the rest of us, the music stays locked away until the year 2103. In this video, we're diving into the stories behind the most expensive records ever sold and the wild stories behind them. We start in the mid-90s. Electronica has carved out its own weird and wonderful niche in the music industry. And sitting right in the middle of it all was Richard D. James, better known as Aphex Twin. In around 1994, he recorded a full album under one of his many aliases, Caustic Window, for release on his own label, Reflex. Test pressings were made, and then nothing happened. The LP was shelved, the release canned, and for about 20 years, Caustic Window became one of those legendary lost albums that fans weren't even sure really existed. Only a tiny handful of copies were believed to be out there. Then, in 2014, one of them suddenly appeared for sale on the online record collecting site Discogs, listed for $13,500. But instead of just watching some rich guy buy it and lock it away forever, the Aphex Twin fan community decided to do something pretty cool. Members of the online forum We Are the Music Makers teamed up with Reflex and launched a Kickstarter campaign. The idea was simple. Everyone chips in, they buy the record as a group, get it digitized so that all the backers can hear it, and then auction off the physical copy. Amazingly, over 4,000 backers raised more than $67,000. The record was bought, digitized, and finally leaked out into the world. Then, the test pressing was put up for auction on eBay. After a week of frantic bidding, the winner was revealed to be Marcus Notch Pearson, the creator of Minecraft, who nabbed it for $46,300, making it the 10th most expensive record ever sold. The money from the sale was split three ways, 1/3 to Aphex Twin and Reflex as royalties, 1/3 refunded back to the Kickstarter backers, and 1/3 donated to Doctors Without Borders. Next up, we go back to 1962, to a time when a band who had been kicking around Liverpool and Hamburg for a couple of years were now in London with their new manager, Brian Epstein, desperately trying to get a record company to show them some love. Epstein eventually arranged to have this 10-inch 78 RPM acetate cut at the HMV store on Oxford Street in London. On one side, Hello Little Girl, a John Lennon original. On the other, Till There Was You, an old show tune sung by Paul. That's Epstein's own handwriting on the labels. He then took the disc to EMI Studios on Abbey Road to a producer called George Martin and played it to him. Martin listened, thought about it, and whilst he wasn't blown away, he heard the potential and offered Brian the chance to bring the boys to Abbey Road for a test session. And the rest is history. So how did this historically pivotal piece of vinyl find its way to the auction block? Well, Epstein also managed another Liverpool band, Jerry and the Pacemakers. At some point in the early 60s, he passed the acetate on to Les Maguire, their keyboard player. Les put it in a box, which wound up in his attic, where it remained, forgotten about, for 50 years. Fast forward to 2016, Maguire digs it out, realises what he has, and sends it to Omega Auctions, who described it as a holy grail Beatles record. It hit the auction block, and all involved were pleasantly surprised when a Manchester man made a final bid of $110,000, making it the 9th most expensive record ever sold. And we're going to keep seeing Beatles records on this list. Speaking of which, in June 1966, Capitol Records in the US released Yesterday and Today, a compilation of songs that weren't included on earlier US pressings of Beatles albums. And this was the cover concept they chose to go with, known to collectors henceforth as the Beatles' Butcher cover. The photo came from a session with Robert Whittaker, who had this highbrow concept he described as a considered disruption of the convention surrounding orthodox pop star promotional photography. The Beatles thought it was amusing, Capitol thought it would be provocative, and when it hit the stores, all hell broke loose. Major chains refused to stock it, parents complained, DJs mocked it on air, and Capitol panicked. So they pulled the album from shelves, recalling thousands of copies, and they ordered a replacement cover which featured this much more innocuous image. And here's the funny thing, rather than destroy the covers, Capitol did something cheaper. They pasted the new cover photo over the top of the old one. These paste-over jobs are known to collectors as second state. and there are thousands out there. If you examine them closely enough, you'll see evidence of the covered-up butcher cover underneath. Many people have successfully managed to carefully peel off the replacement cover, and these are known as third-state butcher covers, but a small number of untouched original first-state butcher covers, with no paste over, just the original cover in all its butchery glory, managed to escape the recall. And one of those pristine, still-sealed stereo first-state copies surfaced in 2016. It went to Heritage Auctions and sold for $125,000 US, making it the 8th most expensive record ever sold. Back in 1965, Frank Wilson was a producer and songwriter at Motown. He was a go-to behind-the-scenes guy for Motown founder Berry Gordy. Wilson cut one single under his own name, a 7-inch called Do I Love You, Indeed I Do. Roughly 250 demo 45s were pressed, and Frank Wilson was getting ready for his big moment, stepping out from behind the scenes and into the spotlight. But Motown got cold feet. Supposedly, Berry Gordy didn't want one of his key producers distracting himself with a singing career. So the single was pulled, and the entire run of 250 demo discs was sent off to be destroyed. But you know the deal, a couple survived, and that's how a perfectly good, authentic Motown tune completely bypassed the 60s, only to resurface more than a decade later on the UK's northern soul scene, circulating on bootlegs, credited to a different artist, and becoming a dance floor filler before anyone even knew who really sang it. And this all led to collectors and DJs starting to ask questions about who the real singer was, and where this mystery record had actually come from. By the 2000s, collectors reckoned there was only 2 genuine copies left in the world, making it truly one of the rarest collectible records on the planet, and the holy grail of Northern Soul. In 2009, one of those 2 turned up at auction and sold for about £25,000, but in 2020 it was sold on to UK collector Lee Jeffries for an eye-watering $130,000 US, making a demo single ordered to be thrown in the bin the 7th most expensive record ever sold. Now, any first pressing of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles is a pretty cool thing to have in your collection, and if you're lucky enough to get a copy signed by a Beatle, then you're talking about something pretty valuable. What about a 1967 UK pressing signed by not 1, not 2, not 3, but all 4 Beatles? That's pretty much the gold standard for autographed memorabilia. You see, signing albums was actually much rarer back in the 60s than it is today. Collectors reckon there's only about 125 Beatles albums in existence, signed by all 4 members of the band. So when this copy of Sgt. Pepper turned up for auction in Dallas in 2013, featuring the authenticated signatures of John, Paul, George and Ringo across the inner gatefold sleeve, only the wealthiest Beatles collectors bothered to bid. And here they are at Heritage Auctions, pushing the price up from a starting bid of $150,000 all the way up to an incredible $290,500 US, making it the 6th most expensive record ever sold. For number 5, we go all the way back to 1953, where a teenager named Elvis Presley walked into Sun Records in Memphis with $3.98 in his pocket, which was just enough for the 18-year-old truck driver to cut himself a 10-inch acetate featuring 2 songs. On one side, My Happiness. On the other, That's When Your Heartaches Begin. It wasn't a commercial release, it was literally a one-off recording, cut and paid for by Elvis, who carried it home with him to his mum, the very first known recording of the future king of rock and roll. And amazingly, it survived. Elvis later lent the disc to a friend, Ed Leake, who kept it safely stored away for over 5 decades, right up until his death in 2010. It was eventually found by Ed's niece, Larissa, who inherited the disc and contacted Graceland to find out its worth. It ended up being sold when Graceland held its first ever memorabilia auction, and this fragile, one-copy-only acetate, the earliest known recording of the most iconic performer of the 20th century, went up for sale. And who was the winning bidder? Musician, producer, and vintage audio tragic Jack White, who paid $300,000 US for a disc that had cost Elvis less than $4 in 1953. White later had the acetate carefully transferred and reissued for Record Store Day, but the original remains one of the most historically important pieces of vinyl ever discovered, and the 5th most expensive record ever sold. At number 4, we have another Beatles album. When the Fab Four released their self-titled double LP in 1968, otherwise known as the White Album, the first run of British pressings came with a stamped serial number on the front. They ran all the way from number 1 up to around 300,000, but the lowest numbers didn't go to the shops. They went straight to the band. 1 to John, 1 to Paul, 1 to George, and 1, the actual number 1, serial number 0000001 to be precise, went to the oldest member of the group, Ringo. He kept it carefully stored away in a bank vault, where it remained untouched and in mint condition. Then, in 2015, Ringo and Barbara Bach held a charity auction, clearing out decades worth of memorabilia for causes they cared about. And sitting quietly among the drum kits, gold records and personal artifacts was the White Album, serial number 0000001. Bidding went insane almost immediately. Beatles collectors knew this wasn't just a rare pressing, it was the first copy, owned by Ringo Starr himself. When the hammer fell, the final price was $790,000, making Ringo's personal White Album not only the most expensive Beatles record of all time, but the 4th most expensive record ever sold. Next up, we jump forward to 1980, and into one of the bleakest moments in rock history. Double Fantasy had just come out. It was John Lennon's big return after 5 years of living quietly out of the spotlight. On the afternoon of December 8, 1980, Lennon and Ono left their apartment building, the Dakota, in New York, on their way to a session at the record plant. Waiting outside was a young fan with a copy of Double Fantasy tucked under his arm. His name was Mark David Chapman. Lennon stopped, took the album and signed his name, John Lennon, 1980, across the front cover. Amazingly, there's a photograph of the moment, Lennon signing the album, with Chapman watching on. A few hours later, when John and Yoko returned home, Chapman was still there. This time, instead of asking for an autograph, he pulled out a gun and shot Lennon dead at the entrance to the Dakota. In the chaos that followed, the signed LP ended up abandoned in a planter near the building. It was found by a building superintendent, handed over to police, and used as evidence, complete with Chapman's fingerprints enhanced on the sleeve and dust jacket. Eventually it was returned to the man who'd found it, along with a letter of gratitude from the district attorney. Years later, in 1999, it was sold through a memorabilia dealer to a private collector for $150,000. It changed hands several times in the years that followed, including a private sale in 2010 for around $850,000, and it was put up for auction again in late 2020 through Golden Auctions, where it sold for $900,000. A grim, one-of-a-kind artifact, very likely the last record John Lennon ever signed, and actually the most expensive vinyl album ever sold, as the remaining 2 records on our list aren't actually vinyl. Number 2 on our list is a record from one of the biggest names in popular music that is literally one of a kind. This was a brand new recording of Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, captured in 2021 with producer T-Bone Burnett, using a mysterious new audio format he called Ionic Original, a kind of ultra-high fidelity lacquer meant to preserve sound in a way vinyl never quite could. I mean, I thought that's why we had CDs, but anyway. Together they cut this one disc with this new technology, and it was the only one ever pressed. Burnett was big on the idea of making a recording that is unique, handmade, one of a kind, like a painting. It was meant to be art in the purest collectible sense. A single master owned by a single person, a rich person. And then they put it up for auction at Christie's in July 2022, and the question was, would anyone actually pay fine art prices for a 7-inch disc? The answer, my friend, was blowing in the flurry of bids, with the hammer falling to a final bid of $1.8 million, making Dylan's Ionic Original the second most expensive physical music recording artifact of all time. Okay, and now the most expensive record ever sold is actually a CD, and this is it. It's inside this box, but I can't show it to you because, well, okay, let me explain. Between 2007 and 2013, Wu-Tang Clan recorded a single album, not an exclusive release, not a limited pressing, just one physical copy of a double CD locked inside this engraved silver box. The idea was part protest, part performance art. The double CD was put up for auction in 2015 to be sold on several conditions outlined in this bound leather tome, including only one copy would ever be manufactured, no commercial release for 88 years, No sampling, no reproductions, no YouTube uploads, no Spotify, no anything. And if you bought it, you could host listening sessions, but never distribute the audio. Wu-Tang Clan's leader, RZA, said at the time, "Limiting the album to one copy will not immediately reattach value to all recorded music, but the debate that our approach has sparked might eventually lead to a change in the perception, value and appreciation of music as a work of art, and that is why we feel the sacrifice is worth it." And so it hit the block and sold for a truly insane $2 million. And the buyer was none other than Martin Shkreli. Yes, the pharmaceutical CEO who had just become the most hated man on earth for price gouging life-saving medication. Here's Shkreli talking about his $2 million purchase.
So you bought Wu-Tang Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. What did you think the first time you listened to it?
It was bad.
So yeah, a rich guy buys an album for $2 million, making it the most expensive physical artifact of recorded music ever sold in history. And that's that. Well, no. There's more to the story. In December 2015, Shkreli was arrested and later convicted for securities fraud, and the US government seized the album as an asset as part of his forfeiture. So for a while, the rarest rap album ever made sat in a federal evidence locker next to boxes of financial paperwork. In 2021, the US government quietly resold the album to Pleaserdao, a cryptocurrency collective / art group, who paid, wait for it, $4 million. Yeah. Once Shkreli got out of jail, he turned up on X and live-streamed a copy he had obviously made of the album to 5,000 followers. He was sued by Pleaserdao, and a New York federal judge ordered Shkreli to surrender his copies of the album. Meanwhile, large segments of the album have been played, legally, as part of art installations in museums such as Tasmania's Mona in Australia. But for anyone else keen to hear it, you'll need to wait until the year 2103, when it's released from the conditions of sale. And they're the most expensive records ever sold. If you like this video and you're interested in more stories about insane money being paid for things, check out my most expensive guitars ever sold at auction, or my most expensive pieces of Star Wars memorabilia. Pick one, I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.